Why a fictional detective mastered real neuroscience before science caught up. What if I told you that a character created in the late 1800s was already applying brain optimization techniques that neuroscience wouldn't validate for another 100 years? Sherlock Holmes wasn't just a brilliant detective in Arthur Conan Doyle's stories. He was a walking blueprint for cognitive enhancement, someone who deliberately chose to sculpt his mind the way an elite athlete builds their body. Most people believe we're born with a fixed brain that can't be changed. Holmes proved otherwise through his daily practices. He had zero interest in useless information. When Watson was shocked to learn Holmes didn't know the Earth orbited the Sun, the detective said something revolutionary. "Now that I know it, I shall do my best to forget it." Sounds crazy, right? But it's pure strategic genius. Holmes understood something modern neuroscience has confirmed. Our brain has limited active processing capacity. Every irrelevant piece of information takes up precious neural real estate. Think of your mind like an attic, the famous analogy Holmes himself used. You wouldn't fill that space with random junk when you could store valuable tools, would you? The detective practiced what we now call cognitive minimalism. He brutally curated what entered his mind. Forensic chemistry? Absolutely essential. London soil types? Critical for tracking criminals. Literature? Political philosophy? Basic astronomy? Disposable for his goals. This wasn't ignorance. It was intentional performance design. Holmes's technique reveals a powerful principle. High performance isn't about knowing everything. It's about knowing exactly what matters. While you're consuming random information on social media, your deep focus capacity fragments. Holmes did the opposite. Every piece of data absorbed had direct purpose. Every skill developed served his central mission. But here's what's most fascinating. Holmes didn't just filter information. He actively retrained his brain. His long meditations weren't rest. They were neural maintenance. His chemical experiments weren't hobbies. They were cognitive pattern training. When he played violin for hours, he wasn't relaxing. He was creating new neural pathways through conscious repetition. 21st century science completely validates this. Brain imaging studies show that elite experts have physically different brains. Areas related to their expertise display greater gray matter density. Holmes built this decades before we understood how it worked. Now, let me ask you something. How much useless information did you consume today that doesn't move you even an inch closer to your goals? Drop the word focus in the comments if you're ready to do this mental cleanup. And if this video's already making you question your habits, smash that like button because there's way more revelation coming. What if you could train your brain like Holmes trained his observation skills? Here's something most people miss. Holmes wasn't born with superhuman observation powers. He built them through a brutal, deliberate method that anyone can replicate. And when you understand this method, you realize you've been living on autopilot for years. The human brain processes about 11 million bits of information per second, but your consciousness can only handle roughly 40 bits. That means you're missing 99.999% of the reality around you. Holmes knew this instinctively and created exercises to expand that window of conscious perception. He practiced what he called scientific observation. It wasn't just looking, it was seeing with surgical intention. When he entered a room, Holmes executed systematic mental sweeps, clothing details, revealing stains, object positions, subtle odors. Every element got cataloged and analyzed for potential meaning. This wasn't natural talent, it was obsessive discipline. Think of it this way, your brain is like a lazy muscle. It always chooses the easiest path, using mental shortcuts and ignoring details. Holmes forced his brain to work hard, constantly. He transformed observation into neural endurance training. Every walk through London streets was a brain gym session. His most powerful technique? Mental reconstruction. After observing something, Holmes would close his eyes and recreate the scene with photographic precision. Where was each person standing? What facial expressions did they have? What inconsistencies existed? This exercise didn't just test his memory, it literally reconfigured the synaptic connections responsible for visual attention. Neuroplasticity is the scientific name. The more you practice a specific skill, the more your brain rebuilds its internal architecture to optimize that function. Holmes was doing this manually, without knowing the technical term, but perfectly understanding the principle. And there's more. He applied strategic ignorance combined with directed curiosity. While discarding useless information, he developed almost pathological obsession with relevant knowledge. He knew 140 different types of cigar ash, could identify 75 distinct perfumes, recognized 42 footprint patterns. Sound like fictional exaggeration? Real forensic specialists develop exactly these capacities. The difference is Holmes consciously chose to develop only skills useful to his mission. No decorative knowledge. Everything had tactical function. Modern cognitive science backs this up completely. Studies on expert performance show that true mastery comes from deliberate practice in narrowly defined domains. Holmes intuitively grasped what psychologist Anders Ericsson would formalize a century later. Expertise requires focused, purposeful training with immediate feedback. The radical part. Holmes treated his attention like currency. He spent it only on high-value targets. In today's attention economy, where every app and platform competes for your focus, this principle is more relevant than ever. Your ability to direct and sustain attention on what matters is perhaps the ultimate competitive advantage. Here's the challenge. For 1 week, practice conscious observation. Choose a familiar environment and force yourself to notice 3 details you've never seen before. Then mentally reconstruct the scene. Comment. Observation. If you're taking this challenge, and subscribe to this channel because you're discovering a mental blueprint most people completely ignore. How Holmes used memory palaces to dominate information like no one else. This is where Holmes became nearly superhuman. His ability to store, organize, and retrieve information instantly. And the method he used has roots in memorization techniques dating back to ancient Greece, but he adapted them to create brutal competitive advantage. The memory palace, or method of Loki, works like this. You create a mental spatial structure, like a house or familiar path, and associate specific information with physical locations within that structure. When you need to remember something, you simply walk mentally through that space and retrieve the data. Holmes took this to stratospheric levels. He didn't have one palace. He had an entire metropolis of organized knowledge. Each type of information occupied a specific district. Violent crimes, East Wing, forensic chemistry, mental laboratory, criminal profiles, neural portrait gallery, everything cataloged, indexed, accessible in milliseconds. Why does this work so well? Our brains evolved to remember spatial information with absurd ease. You can remember the route to places you visited years ago, but forget what you ate for breakfast yesterday. Holmes hacked this evolutionary feature. He transformed abstract concepts into physical objects within mental spaces. Science completely validates this. Studies with memory champions show they don't have special brains or superior IQs. They simply train spatial memorization techniques. MRI scans reveal that when using memory palaces, brain areas linked to spatial navigation light up intensely. But Holmes went beyond simple memorization. He created connections between seemingly unrelated information. A detail about poisons might be mentally connected to a case from years ago, which related to a specific soil type, which linked to a London neighborhood. This multi-dimensional neural network enabled insights that seemed impossible. Think about your own brain. Right now, you probably depend on Google searches, phone notes, digital reminders. That's not bad. But there's a cost. You've outsourced your memory, and with it, weakened your capacity to make rapid connections between concepts. Holmes kept everything internally accessible because he knew processing speed is competitive advantage. The most fascinating technique? He reviewed his memory palaces regularly. Before sleeping, he'd take walks through these spaces, reinforcing neural connections. This wasn't passive meditation, it was active mental software maintenance. Each review strengthened synapses, making retrieval faster. Next time, modern neuroscience has discovered something called memory consolidation during sleep. When you review information before sleeping, your brain prioritizes consolidating those memories during REM cycles. Holmes was leveraging this without understanding the mechanism. He just knew it worked. The practical application for you? Stop treating your brain like a hard drive backup. Start treating it like a high-performance engine that needs quality fuel, regular maintenance, and strategic use. The ability to connect disparate pieces of information quickly, without external devices, gives you speed that no amount of smartphone searching can match. Now think, what if you organized your professional knowledge into a memory palace? What if you could access critical information instantly without depending on devices? Comment palace if this concept fascinates you, and hit that like button, because the next part reveals the darkest secret of Holmes's performance system, why Holmes balanced extreme intensity with strategic neural recovery. Here's the most controversial and revealing aspect of Holmes's methodology. He understood that extreme performance requires not just brutal training, but calculated recovery, and his decompression methods were as unconventional as his work techniques. Holmes alternated between states of intense brain hyperactivity and what appeared to be total mental shutdown. When on a case, he'd go days without proper sleep, eating poorly, operating in absolute hyperfocus mode. His brain functioned at continuous maximum capacity. Then, when the case ended, he'd withdraw completely, sometimes for weeks. This wasn't inconsistency, it was cyclical performance design. Modern neuroscience calls this cognitive periodization. Elite athletes do this physically, intense training periods followed by deep recovery. Holmes applied the same principle to the brain. He knew you can't operate at peak constantly without destroying the system. The violin was his neural transition tool. When he played for hours, he wasn't just relaxing, he was forcing his brain to switch from analytical deductive mode to creative intuitive mode. Classical music activates different brain regions than logical reasoning. This alternation prevents cognitive burnout and keeps different neural networks healthy. His long meditation sessions in his armchair, smoking his pipe, were actually default mode network training. That's the neural network that activates when you're not focused on anything specific. Research shows it's during these moments that the brain consolidates learning, makes unexpected connections, and solves problems unconsciously. Holmes had body awareness too. He practiced boxing, fencing, and Japanese martial arts. This wasn't physical vanity, it was nervous system maintenance. Intense exercise releases BDNF, a protein that literally fertilizes new neuron growth. He kept the brain hardware running through the body. But here's the most controversial element. Holmes occasionally used substances to modulate mental states. In the stories, he used morphine and cocaine when his mind felt underutilized. Arthur Conan Doyle was portraying actual Victorian-era practices when these substances were legal and even medically recommended. Obviously, not suggesting anyone follow that route, but the underlying principle is valid. Holmes understood that different mental states serve different purposes. He tried dangerously and inadvisably to chemically induce specific states. Today, we have much safer methods: meditation, controlled breathing, cold exposure, exercise, optimized sleep. Holmes's real secret was this complete cycle: extreme focus, deep recovery, neural diversification, physical maintenance. It wasn't just one of these things. It was the entire system functioning in harmony. Sustainable performance requires respecting biological limits while strategically expanding them. Modern research on peak performers confirms this pattern. Studies of elite musicians, athletes, and chess players show they don't just train harder, they recover smarter. They understand that growth happens during rest, not during work. The stimulus creates demand. Recovery creates adaptation. The framework Holmes built intuitively is what we now call stress recovery balance. You need sufficient stress to trigger adaptation, but sufficient recovery to actually build capacity. Too much stress without recovery leads to burnout. Too much recovery without stress leads to stagnation. The final question is, are you trying to operate at high performance without giving your brain the resources to recover? Comment recovery if you realized you've been neglecting this aspect. Share this video with someone who needs to understand this balance. And subscribe because we're uncovering more performance secrets that history has hidden.